As the shadowy figure, seemingly the final boss, prepared to unleash a devastating attack, the ground around it began to rupture, flashing with chaotic energy. Standing firm before it were the protagonist and his companion. The protagonist, gripping his wand, tightly declared with resolve that it was over. Summoning his ultimate ability, Maze Master, he released a colossal burst of energy. Simultaneously, the boss retaliated with its own final strike. However, the protagonist's attack pierced through the enemy's defenses, overwhelming the boss in a monumental explosion of fire, shockwaves, and blinding light. Gusts of wind followed the explosion, sweeping across the battlefield with violent force. As the smoke cleared and silence fell, a glowing information box appeared, stating that the game had been cleared. It had all been a game abyss of the labyrinth, and the protagonist finally exhaled a sigh of relief. A notification window appeared, highlighting that he had conquered the turn-based master difficulty. But before he could savor the moment, another screen emerged, revealing an even more daunting challenge, the developer difficulty level. Along with this, a new ability unlocked, turn-based hourglass, a reward for those who had cleared the highest level of difficulty. Without hesitation, he began allocating his character's bonus points, focusing all 10 into wisdom, consistent with his mage build. But as he confirmed the changes, his computer screen suddenly began to glow with a blinding light. A moment later, everything around him dissolved into nothingness. When he regained awareness, he found himself lying on cold ground, disoriented. A gruff voice was shouting at him, calling him a criminal bastard, and demanding he get his head straight. Still confused, the protagonist thought he was dreaming and gave a slight smirk in disbelief. Angered by this, the man grabbed him and threw him harshly to the floor. The impact, pain, and sensation were all too real. He realized with growing alarm that this wasn't a dream. As he looked around, he noticed a massive crowd of similarly disoriented people. Standing before them was an old man beside what appeared to be a dimensional gate. The old man announced that all present should have received their magic wands. He explained that each of them had committed crimes and had been enslaved. The labyrinth, he said, was their last opportunity to change their fate. Still grappling with the situation, the protagonist tried to make sense of what had happened. Just moments ago, he had been casually playing a brutally difficult game. Now he was thrust into this foreign world with no warning. He and 3 other members were grouped together and forced to enter the labyrinth. His teammates were visibly terrified, their expressions painted with paranoia and dread. In an internal monologue, the protagonist admitted he had no idea what was going on, but one thing was clear. He looked exactly like Caleb, the character he had just created. If this really was the labyrinth inside the game, it would be the worst kind of hell. First, he needed to assess the situation. He attempted to view the stats of his party members. However, just as he began, one of them started acting strangely. It turned out that the man had received a skill called Divine Oracle, a power that allowed him to see fragments of the future. What he saw horrified him. He had witnessed a vision of their deaths, and unable to handle the revelation, began to lose his sanity on the spot. Suddenly, the fat member of the group panicked and began running for his life, screaming incoherently. Moments later, green goblins emerged from the darkness and surrounded the group. One goblin struck down the fleeing man, killing him instantly. An arrow was then fired, hitting another member and killing him on the spot. As the goblins advanced, chaos erupted. One of them lunged at the protagonist with its blade. Just as death seemed imminent, a glowing window suddenly appeared before his eyes. Turn-based hourglass special ability activated. Time froze. The goblins halted mid-motion. The protagonist now had 60 seconds and 4 action points to act. He decided to raise a world barrier to block the sword and then launched a fireball spell from his wand. The flames erupted violently, engulfing the goblins and reducing them to charred remains. Only smoldering ashes and fire vapors lingered in the aftermath. Still disoriented but thinking clearly, the protagonist realized this system mirrored that of the game. And if that were the case, then no one knew more about mages than he did. He turned to the sole surviving member, a terrified female recruit clutching her wand, and asked her what kind of magic she had. She admitted that she had never used one before. With calm urgency, he advised her, "If a monster charges at you, don't hesitate. Just use it immediately." The two of them advanced cautiously through the twisting labyrinth in search of an exit gate. He didn't know whether it was the developer or some divine entity that had thrown him into this nightmarish scenario, but one thing was certain: he would survive until the very end. A few years earlier, a labyrinth had erupted, releasing monsters from its surface. Countless adventurers and mages had died. To train labyrinth explorers, people were thrown inside, and only those who survived were raised further. The narrator noted there was no guarantee that this information was entirely accurate, so caution was necessary. The female member thanked the protagonist and introduced herself as Yernil. She remarked that he seemed calm and quiet, though she had heard him speak to others on the slave ship. The protagonist was startled, realizing that some here might know him from before, and decided to be more careful. Yernil said she had lived in the forest before working at an errand center, but the place had been disguising drugs as parcels. She was falsely accused, couldn't pay the fine, and became a slave. The protagonist told her to keep her voice down, but his ability activated a trap had been triggered. He reasoned that most first-floor traps were wall-based, but since there were no holes near Yernil and the ceiling was intact, it was likely a floor trap. He recalled there were 4 such traps on the first level: the rising spike, the explosive nail, the gas trap, and the drop trap to the second floor. In a moment of decision, he stepped onto the tile Yernil had been on, explaining, "It triggers when you move your foot." "I'll take it." She apologized, and he told her to fetch the barrel they had passed earlier. After some time, she returned with it. They placed it on the tile, and once he stepped away, he used telekinesis to shift the barrel, causing the trap to erupt in a burst of fire. He thought that, thanks to the hourglass, he had the first move. Since it was only the first floor, 1 point in wisdom was enough for now, but he still needed to confirm whether using the hourglass at will consumed action points. Goblins emerged from the darkness, triggering the hourglass again. The protagonist cast consecutive fireballs, each costing a single action point. The flames consumed the goblins instantly. Yernil praised his fast casting. When he asked about her jumping ability, she said she could manage 4 meters. He noted it showed her dexterity and handed her a goblin's bow, which she took before moving to cover the rear. Soon, she reported hearing footsteps behind them. The protagonist guessed it was due to a skill like sound mapping, which detected movement through sound. They hid at a corner. But when the footsteps approached, he stopped the group and demanded the reason for following them. The bandits admitted they were after the elf girl. The bandits demanded that the protagonist hand over the elf, promising to spare his life. Their leader argued that the protagonist's magic would not pierce their shields and offered to trade the elf for his safety. Yernil appeared visibly startled. The protagonist told the bandit to shut his mouth and leave unless he wanted to die. In response, the leader ordered his men to kill them. At that moment, the hourglass ability activated. Wielding 2 wands, the protagonist cast a lightning spell, targeting a puddle where the bandit stood. The current shocked them, forcing them to drop their weapons. He then followed with a fireball, which created a thick smokescreen. Using the cover, he instructed Yernil to shoot. He was unsure if her attack would succeed, but her arrow struck true, killing the bandits, a result that surprised him. Yernil said it was her first time killing a human, and he admitted it was his first as well. He felt himself growing numb, gradually getting used to the act. They collected the bandits' belongings, which included tools and supplies. As they moved on, the protagonist reflected on how heavily he had relied on the hourglass. Depending solely on abilities and luck was not his style. It might be a game world, but lives were at stake, and he intended to survive. They had been moving for 12 hours, fending off goblins along the way, before deciding to take a short break. Yernil thanked the protagonist for saving her twice that day. He replied that he never turned his back on those he trusted. That was simply not how he operated. He decided to take a quick nap and entered a resting state. During this time, he seemed to level up and allocated his remaining 2 points to the wisdom attribute. Yernil had also leveled up. When he awoke and exited the resting state, he tested his magic and found that his spell damage had increased compared to before. After their rest, they continued toward the gate's location and, by chance, found the exit. Several people were already there, and judging by their gear, they appeared to be veterans. The protagonist approached cautiously. One of them praised the pair for surviving a full day and invited the protagonist to join them in clearing the gate. They explained that they needed a mage because their own mage had been killed. One member clarified that their companion was not completely gone. He had used a soul preservation spell, meaning he could still be revived with a resurrection scroll. It became clear that they needed a mage to defeat the boss. After assessing the situation, the protagonist concluded that the boss must be a venomous spider, an observation that impressed the group. They explained that the venomous spider was a monster that attacked with lethal venom and webs. By the time a party reached its lair, the room would already be thick with webbing, and the spider would move across it at extreme speed, inflicting debuffs like slow and bind. The only real counter was a mage with fire magic, who could ignite the ceiling to burn away the webs, forcing the spider down so the rest of the party could finish it off. The group again offered him a place, but he declined. He suspected they were hiding something only 4 people could pass through the gate after defeating the boss, yet there were already 5. It was clear they intended to leave Yernil behind. One of the party members admitted they had not meant to hide the truth, but apologized that it had come to this. They needed a mage and tried to persuade the protagonist to let the elf girl go. The protagonist thought to himself that it was a tempting offer, one that almost swayed him, but if he remained a slave after escaping, they would simply throw him back inside. He told himself he would never find another Yernil. Refusing to abandon her, he instead proposed hiring 2 of them for 10,000 gold. He planned to use the money from today's loot gold, gemstones, and gear to buy their freedom. The party discussed his terms, but the protagonist could tell they were pressed for time. They needed to revive their mage before the soul-preserved corpse decayed. After negotiations, they agreed. A divine oath was sworn before the goddess, and the priestess sealed the covenant. With the oath binding them, they entered the boss room. Spider webs clung to pillars and walls, and the darkness made it difficult to see. The protagonist noticed explosives scattered about. One of the members told him to burn the ceiling webs and stop trying to play hero. Before he could respond, a projectile shot down from above toward the man, but he managed to deflect it with his axe. The venomous spider began launching multiple projectiles. At that moment, the protagonist's hourglass ability activated. He unleashed 4 fireballs at once, the flames spiraling toward the spider in a circular pattern. The blast that followed shook the room, filling it with fire and debris. Stunned by the display, the others stared as he gave the order to attack. Yernil fired her bow, pinning the spider and breaking its legs. The protagonist told the priestess to cast a magic shield, then ordered the rogue to strike when the shields were up, a command that visibly angered him. Nevertheless, the rogue dashed in with remarkable speed, tearing another leg apart. The spider shrieked in pain. As the shields were reinforced and the next attacks pressed forward, the spider prepared to detonate its venom sacs. The protagonist decided that freezing the poison before detonation was the best move. He cast an ice spike, sending a perfect shard forward at incredible speed. It struck true, freezing the sacs and preventing the explosion. He then told the dwarf to charge. When the dwarf tried to argue protocol, the protagonist snapped at him to do it. Muttering about his attitude, the dwarf nonetheless leapt forward, using brute strength to split the spider's head in 2. While the others began celebrating, the protagonist stayed alert. He pointed his wand upward and told them to look. The sight instantly killed their cheer. The ceiling was crawling with spider eggs, ready to hatch. He instructed Yernil to roll an orc ale barrel to him. She struggled, but managed it. The dwarf guessed his plan, but asked about his aim. The protagonist told the priestess to cast weapon light on Yernil's arrow, then ordered her to shoot the ceiling. The light illuminated the web-covered roof, revealing the target. With that, the dwarf hurled the barrel. The protagonist timed the throw with the hourglass ability, casting multiple fireballs into it. The resulting explosion charred the eggs in a wave of flame. The party stood in awe at how easily it was handled and began questioning his identity. As the exit gate opened, the protagonist let out a sigh of relief, still frustrated at how difficult it was to work with a party he could not control, like in the game. The others, however, looked at him with admiration. He thought back to how obsessed he had been with the game Abyss of Labyrinth, but quickly shook off the memory. Awkwardly, he mentioned that he had been a slave at the academy. The dwarf seemed to understand his reluctance to share more. The protagonist reminded them of the settlement it would be completed in the village, and until then, it was not fulfilled.
Oaths sworn to the goddess of justice had to be honored exactly as written, which meant both he and Yernil needed to exit through the gate. He knew this, and the party assured him that with his skill, he could easily navigate the labyrinth and get his payment in the village. He also returned the belongings of their fallen mage, asking only for the backpack. After the formalities, they prepared to part ways. Before they could, Yernil suddenly asked the party to take the protagonist with them. Everyone was shocked. She urged him to go to the village, take the payment, and buy his freedom. She admitted feeling guilty for burdening him, expressed her gratitude, and asked him to live on for both of them.
Yernil suggested she would be fine on her own. Right then, a bright system window appeared before the protagonist, offering an hourglass expansion opportunity. It indicated that if he stayed with Yernil now, her trust level would reach 100%. As long as it remained above 80% thereafter, he would be able to issue commands to her during his turn, and she would execute them of her own will once his turn ended. He considered the possibility that this was a hidden feature of his ability. In the game, special abilities had evolved in unique ways upon leveling up, and it seemed the same logic applied here. The thought of its future potential intrigued him. The dwarf then asked if he truly intended to join their party. Frustrated by the urgency of the moment, the protagonist activated his ability, freezing time to think things through. Weighing the pros and cons carefully, he decided to continue forward with Yernil. When time resumed, Yernil broke down in tears of relief. The dwarf asked again if he was serious, and he confirmed it. The priestess raised a practical concern. How did they plan to take down the next exit boss with just 2 people? The protagonist replied that for that, they needed the spider's corpse. After negotiations, the dwarf agreed to deduct 1,300 gold from the earlier payment in exchange for it. As a parting gesture, they gave him 4 elixirs, and Priestess Emma blessed both him and Yernil. The rest of the party wished them farewell before crossing the gate. Once the others had gone, Yernil dropped to her knees, asking how they could possibly clear the next exit room alone. The protagonist reassured her they could handle it. First, however, they would extract the spider's fangs. Since the success rate depended on dexterity, and Yernil's was far higher than his own, he insisted she do it. After the extraction, they prepared to move forward, planning to make poison arrows from the fangs. By combining goblin arrows with venomous fangs, one could craft poison arrows. The protagonist asked Yernil to handle the task as well. He knew that with the right materials and special arrows, even an average bow could unleash devastating power. Yernil succeeded without much effort, which genuinely surprised him. He hadn't expected her to finish it so quickly. As they moved toward their destination, the protagonist decided to test the new hourglass expansion feature. Not long after, a small group of goblins appeared the perfect opportunity. Activating his ability, he cast a fireball at the nearest goblin, then instructed Yernil to shoot the leg of the one at the back. She obeyed, loosing an arrow into its leg, and he quickly followed up with another fireball to finish it off. Curious, he asked why she had aimed for the leg instead of the head. She simply replied that the leg was easier to hit. From this, he realized that when he issued orders during his ability's active time, she still acted according to her own judgment, rather than blindly following his exact intention. Wanting to learn more, he activated his ability again, and asked Yernil to tell him everything she knew about him before they had entered the labyrinth. She said she had overheard, back on the slave ship, that he was made a slave because of a murder charge. Hearing this, he made a light joke about it, but Yernil added that she believed he must have had a personal reason. According to the rumor, he had killed a female member of the Fox tribe. The protagonist recalled that in the game, the Fox tribe was known for its magic, intelligence, beauty, and seductive charm. Yernil assumed that the woman must have done something unforgivable, as the man she knew would never kill without reason. He then mentioned that he had once been a labyrinth adventurer in a city far to the east, and said that much had happened since then, ending the conversation. Soon, they arrived at the exit gate and discovered Avison, the mage member from the previous party, preserved under a soul preservation spell. The protagonist considered retrieving the body, knowing they could receive a reward from the Avison family. They also found a black hornet larva. While pondering its presence, the protagonist asked Yernil if there had been any recent reports from adventurers. She replied that she wasn't certain, but had heard rumors that someone named Mr. Beck had gone missing. Supposedly, he had taken down a black hornet alone after his entire party was wiped out. The realization struck him. The worst possible matchup for him would be against a rogue, and there was a chance this was a possessed adventurer. Such people had their souls captured by the labyrinth master, becoming mind-controlled servants, permanently afflicted with madness. They retained all their skills and spells from life, but became far more powerful a nightmare to face. And then it hit him. If the rumors were true, Mr. Beck was no longer missing. He was waiting beyond that very gate. To escape, they would have to defeat him. The thought of facing a rogue of Beck's caliber, now under the labyrinth master's control, tightened the air around them. Seeing the tense expression on his face, Yernil asked if they were in serious trouble. He replied that while it was a tough situation, they could handle it. Back in village, the dwarf grew increasingly frustrated as he shared information about a remarkably fast and skilled caster mage. The other man refused to believe him, saying that such a person appeared only once in 100 years. The dwarf finally told him that if he didn't believe it, then so be it. The man shrugged and replied that it didn't matter anyway. What was important was that the dwarf had returned alive. They began discussing the expertise of Mr. Beck, a legend among the first floor adventurers, though he had once been caught by the labyrinth master. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted when the door slammed open and two shadowy figures entered. It was the mother and brother of Avison, named Clarence. The mother anxiously demanded to know if her son was truly dead. The dwarf solemnly confirmed it, explaining that while they were searching for the exit, Avison had gone ahead alone and been stung by a black hornet. Hearing this, Avison's mother lost her composure, but Clarence tried to reassure her, saying that Avison's body was still preserved. He urged her to stay calm and listen to the dwarf's full account. The dwarf explained that the magic preserving Avison's soul would last for a week, so resurrection should not be an issue. A resurrection scroll would be available in 3 days, and their party had planned to depart then. However, Clarence remarked that time was running out and asked if the dwarf could find Avison immediately. The dwarf replied that he could use a tracking spell activated through Avison's identification card to locate him. He mentioned that a certain genius mage had helped him retrieve Avison's belongings. When the dwarf spoke of the mage's incredibly fast, chantless spells, Clarence remained skeptical. At that moment, a lizard man approached Avison's mother and inquired about payment, proposing that his group, who had been to the 3rd floor before, be hired to retrieve Avison's body. Clarence, with a terrifying glare, flatly refused, causing the lizard man to flee. He warned that relying on money to solve everything would only attract dangerous opportunists. Clarence declared that he would personally accompany the dwarf's party to retrieve his brother and also express his curiosity about the genius mage they had been discussing. Meanwhile, in another part of the labyrinth, the protagonist and Yernil were talking about the delay caused by waiting for the dwarf's party. The protagonist pointed out that if they waited too long, the caterpillar offspring of the 1st floor boss monster would die of starvation within 2 days. Its scent currently kept other monsters away, but once it faded, those creatures would swarm in. They needed to act quickly. The protagonist added that if Beck truly was present, their 1st floor party would stand no chance against him in combat. However, he had devised a rougher strategy. They would focus on intensive monster hunting to raise their levels, enabling them to defeat the exit gate boss. They began by hunting goblins. He cast fire and lightning spells, while Yernil supported with her arrows. The protagonist thought to himself that level 5 was the cap in the 1st floor labyrinth, and since he had already reached just above level 4 after defeating the venomous spider, grinding for 2 days should get him there. Level 5 was crucial because it was a growth milestone that unlocked an additional special ability. He decided to collect only the most valuable magic stones and discard the rest. Their next target was a goblin sorcerer, as the protagonist hoped to obtain the most useful scrolls from it. After a difficult battle, they decided to rest. The protagonist praised Yernil for her efforts. With their preparations complete, he announced that he would sleep first, but Yernil asked about the guard rotation. When she realized he intended to rest before her, she expressed mild irritation, accusing him of always having the final say. The protagonist reasoned that if he slept first, he could level up and devise better strategies. To appease her, he offered to take an extra 30 minutes of her shift, which made her smile and agree. Once they entered their resting state, both of them leveled up. An additional notification appeared stating that they could now choose a new special ability,